The hotel lobby was quiet, almost peaceful, except for the occasional clatter of luggage wheels on the marble floor and the soft murmur of guests speaking to the reception staff. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers, giving the place an air of elegance and calm. But in one corner of the lobby, a storm was quietly brewing, and it wasn't visible at first glance. A man had arrived, a well-known billionaire, someone whose reputation alone could command rooms, conferences, and headlines. He had traveled thousands of miles for a series of urgent meetings, but his patience, already thin from travel and jet lag, was about to be tested. He approached the reception desk, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, shoes gleaming as if they had been polished just for him. He leaned slightly forward, his face tight with annoyance, and spoke, expecting immediate understanding. But the young staff behind the desk looked uncomfortable. His English was not perfectly matched to their understanding, and the situation became complicated quickly. He repeated himself, louder this time, and the young receptionist tried her best to respond politely, bowing slightly and gesturing her hands, trying to explain that they didn't fully understand. The billionaire's expression darkened. A vein of frustration flashed across his forehead. His voice rose a little, sharp enough to draw the attention of other guests. Some looked away, pretending not to notice, while others paused to watch quietly, sensing a drama unfolding. "I told you what I need. Why is nobody understanding me?" he demanded, tapping a finger impatiently against the counter. His words were clear to him, but in the language barrier they were confusing to the staff. Behind the reception, a young waitress was clearing tables in the small cafe adjacent to the lobby. She had noticed the commotion from the corner of her eye, but she was careful not to interfere. She had seen people like him before, important, high status, impatient, and she knew that approaching too quickly could make things worse. Yet she could feel something unusual in the air. There was not just frustration, but a real need. Something important was being lost in translation, and she had a feeling that she could help, if only someone would listen. The billionaire began pacing a little, clearly seething now. His expensive watch caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flashing with each movement. He glanced around the lobby, clearly irritated that his presence and urgency were not being matched by the staff's competence. He raised his voice again, making a point that drew the eyes of more guests, some whispering to one another about the strange scene of a man so powerful losing his temper over language. Meanwhile, the young waitress continued to observe quietly. She was not usually the type to insert herself into high-stakes situations, but there was something about this moment that made her heart beat faster. She could see that the man was trying to communicate something urgent, perhaps something crucial to his work or personal life. She also saw the staff struggling to maintain composure, nodding politely, apologizing softly, yet failing to bridge the gap. A thought began to form in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the bridge he needed. She had learned Japanese perfectly from a young age, thanks to her mother who had insisted on discipline and practice. But what set her apart was not just fluency. It was understanding nuance, context, and formality. She could speak politely, firmly, and clearly in ways that even native speakers respected. And she realized, watching the billionaire, that this situation called for that very skill. But she hesitated. Approaching someone who seemed so angry could backfire. What if he dismissed her? What if he became more irate? But then again, what if she could solve everything with just a few words? The moment felt heavy with suspense. The receptionist, clearly anxious, was trying to calm the man down, bowing slightly and repeating phrases she had memorized. The billionaire waved his hands, impatient, and his words, though sharp, carried a tone of desperation. He needed someone who could understand, and the staff could not provide it. He looked around, perhaps expecting a manager or translator to appear, but nobody did. He glanced toward the small cafe, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was then that the waitress made her decision. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath and stepped toward the man. Every step felt measured. She did not rush, she did not stumble, and her expression was calm, reassuring. The billionaire's eyes followed her with skepticism. "Are you the one who can help me?" he asked, his tone a mixture of doubt and impatience. She nodded slightly, still quiet, and gestured for him to speak slowly, giving him confidence that she would understand. As he began to explain, carefully, in English this time, she listened intently, her eyes fixed on him. She caught every word, every subtle nuance, every inflection, understanding not just what he said but what he implied. And then, in perfectly fluent Japanese, she repeated his requests back to the staff, using polite, formal, and precise language. Every word was chosen carefully to convey exactly what he needed, in a way that respected both the billionaire and the hotel's protocols. The reaction was immediate. The staff's faces shifted from anxiety to relief. Understanding finally dawned. The billionaire froze for a moment, taken aback. His mouth opened slightly, his usual composure shaken. He had expected someone to speak a few words, perhaps a basic translation, but this was flawless. The precision, the tone, the clarity, it all matched what he wanted perfectly. He had not anticipated that a young waitress would have such skill. He had underestimated her completely. A hush fell over the lobby. Guests, who had been quietly observing, now leaned slightly forward, curious about what had just happened. The staff looked at the waitress with newfound respect, nodding to each other silently, acknowledging that she had just solved what seemed impossible. The billionaire, who had been fuming only moments before, now appeared stunned, unsure of how to respond. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, softened slightly, reflecting awe and a hint of admiration. The waitress continued to calmly manage the situation. She did not boast, she did not demand recognition. She simply did what needed to be done, bridging the gap between frustration and understanding. The billionaire, despite himself, began to realize that he had misjudged her entirely. He had assumed that her role as a waitress limited her skills, that she could not possibly be capable of handling something so crucial. Yet here she was, proving him wrong with quiet confidence and undeniable talent. It was a moment that changed the energy of the entire lobby. The billionaire, who had been tense and impatient, began to relax slightly, his anger dissipating. He saw not just the solution to his problem, but the person who had created that solution. For the first time, he seemed genuinely impressed, and perhaps even a little humbled. The waitress, meanwhile, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from recognition, but from knowing that she had acted when it mattered most. She had stepped forward when courage and skill were required, and it had made all the difference. The tension slowly melted. The staff began to assist the billionaire efficiently, following the instructions she had translated. Other guests returned to their conversations, but now with a sense of curiosity and admiration for the quiet heroine who had resolved what seemed impossible. The billionaire finally spoke again, this time in a softer tone, almost hesitant, as if realizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. You handled that perfectly," he said, the words tinged with respect. The waitress nodded politely, keeping her expression calm and humble. She did not seek praise, but in that moment, she had earned it without asking. The billionaire, for all his wealth and power, had learned something valuable, not just about communication, but about underestimating people based on their position or appearance. The young woman who had served coffee and cleared tables had just demonstrated skills that many executives and professionals would envy. As the scene slowly settled, the waitress returned to her cafe duties, her mind still calm but her heart racing with excitement. She knew this encounter would be remembered, not just by the billionaire, but by everyone who had witnessed it. It was a small, seemingly ordinary act, yet it had carried extraordinary impact. And though she did not yet know what would come next, she felt a quiet confidence. She had acted with skill, poise, and courage, and it had changed the course of events. The billionaire remained at the reception desk for a few more moments, processing what had just happened. He glanced at the young waitress one last time, a mixture of awe and grudging respect in his eyes. He realized that sometimes talent and intelligence are hidden in the most unexpected places, and that assumptions can be dangerous. He had come to the hotel expecting a routine stay, but he had been given a lesson in humility and appreciation instead. And so, the lobby returned to its normal rhythm. Guests spoke softly, staff went about their duties efficiently, and the young waitress continued her work, a quiet smile playing at the corner of her lips. She knew she had done something important, something that mattered, and that feeling, subtle but powerful, stayed with her as she served the next guest, unaware of just how much her life, and perhaps the billionaire's, was about to change. The lobby had returned to its usual calm, yet the atmosphere still felt charged. The billionaire, a man used to commanding rooms and bending situations to his will, was now quiet. He leaned slightly on the polished reception counter, watching the young waitress as she moved with quiet confidence, carrying a tray of coffee and tea. There was something about her composure that unsettled him, and at the same time intrigued him. He had expected chaos when he arrived, frustration from the staff, and maybe a few apologies. He had not expected someone like her, someone so calm and capable, to step forward and resolve what he thought would be an insurmountable problem. Staff members behind the desk exchanged subtle glances, still recovering from the previous moment. They whispered softly to one another, a mix of awe and relief. It was clear that the young waitress had saved them from a difficult situation, but nobody dared to speak loudly about it, fearing it might disrupt the fragile calm. The billionaire, for his part, seemed lost in thought, tapping a finger against the counter as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He was a man used to power and control, but he had never been confronted with humility and competence in such an unexpected form. Meanwhile, the waitress returned to her cafe duties, clearing tables with steady hands. She kept her head down, letting the attention die down naturally. She did not seek recognition, nor did she want it. In her mind, she was simply doing what was necessary. But deep inside, she felt a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. Pride because she had managed a situation that could have gone terribly wrong. Anxiety because she had a sense that this encounter was only the beginning, that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet predict. The billionaire, after a few moments of silence, spoke again, his voice quieter now, less harsh. "That was impressive," he said, almost to himself. The words were simple yet heavy with meaning. For him to admit admiration in public was rare. He had been accustomed to people either obeying his commands or attempting to impress him, but rarely had he encountered someone who solved a problem without seeking his approval or recognition. He was intrigued, a feeling he had not felt in a long time, genuine curiosity. The young waitress, who was arranging cups neatly on a tray, noticed his gaze. She felt the weight of his attention but did not falter. She gave a slight nod in acknowledgement but continued her work. She was aware of the delicate balance in the room. Too much attention on her and it might cause tension again. Too little, and she might miss the subtle cues that something important was unfolding. Her training, patience, and instincts all told her to stay calm and composed, and that is exactly what she did. The billionaire stepped away from the desk and began walking slowly across the lobby, observing everything. His eyes were sharp, taking in the details of the hotel's operations, but they always returned to her. He noticed the efficiency of her movements, the careful attention she gave to each task, and the quiet authority she commanded without speaking loudly. It was a rare combination, one that most people failed to recognize. He felt a strange respect growing, accompanied by a hint of unease. He had underestimated her entirely. As the minutes passed, the hotel staff began to resume their duties with more confidence. They had seen her work and realized that problems which seemed impossible could be handled with calm, intelligence, and skill. The receptionist who had struggled moments before now moved with renewed assurance, quietly grateful for the young waitress who had intervened. Other employees watched from the back, whispering to one another about how remarkable her actions had been. There was a sense of admiration, mixed with the realization that one person, regardless of her role, could make a tremendous difference. The billionaire, now seated in a comfortable lounge chair, leaned back and watched the bustling lobby with renewed interest. He had expected routine service, but what he saw now was competence and dedication at a level that surprised him. It was no longer about the language barrier, It was about skill, presence, and human understanding. He observed the young waitress with a keen eye, noticing how she handled a guest's request with care, how she managed the tray without spilling a drop, and how she moved gracefully around other staff and guests. Every motion was intentional, every gesture precise. Curiosity finally overcame his skepticism. He called her over, and she approached cautiously, holding a small tray of beverages. "I need to ask you something," he said, his tone measured now. There was no anger, no impatience, only genuine interest. "How did you manage that?" It seemed impossible. The young waitress smiled faintly, understanding that this was the moment to respond with honesty and humility. "I've studied Japanese for many years," she explained softly. "I've also learned how to listen carefully and convey meaning accurately. Sometimes, understanding is more important than speaking loudly." The billionaire listened intently, absorbing every word. He nodded slowly, impressed not just by her knowledge, but by her ability to remain calm under pressure. He realized that her skill was not just about language. It was about observation, patience, and intelligence. He began to see a side of human capability he rarely encountered. Most people tried to impress him, but few could handle situations like this with such composure and effectiveness. Meanwhile, the lobby continued to function smoothly. Guests returned to their conversations, some curious about the interaction between the billionaire and the young waitress, but none interfering. Staff members were now quietly watching, learning, and silently admiring the composure of the young woman. It was a rare teaching moment, one that would be remembered in the hotel long after the day ended. She had demonstrated that skill, confidence, and humility could transform tense situations into successful outcomes. The billionaire finally leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Most people don't step up like that," he said quietly. "They wait for instructions or they panic. You did something different." His voice carried a mix of respect and disbelief. The young waitress nodded politely, understanding that he was acknowledging her courage and intelligence. She did not respond with words of pride. Instead, she simply continued to maintain her calm, composed presence. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. After a few moments, he gestured for her to sit down. "Tell me more about yourself," he said. "How did you learn all this? How do you stay so calm under pressure?" The young waitress hesitated briefly but then began to explain. She spoke of years of study, dedication, and small moments of courage that had shaped her. She talked about her love for learning languages, her fascination with culture, and her belief that understanding people was as important as understanding words. Each sentence was measured, clear, and thoughtful. The billionaire listened, genuinely captivated. He realized that this encounter was more than just a moment of translation. It was a lesson in character and perseverance. Here was someone who had cultivated skill, intelligence, and composure in ways that even he found remarkable. His initial irritation, once so dominant, had completely faded. In its place was curiosity, respect, and an awareness that he had underestimated someone based on their role rather than their abilities. As the conversation continued, other staff members watched silently, taking mental notes. They had witnessed a rare example of excellence in action. The young waitress had not only resolved a problem, but she had also taught an unspoken lesson. That confidence, intelligence, and humility often come together in unexpected ways. They realized that she was not just a server of food and beverages. She was a bridge, a communicator, and a problem solver who could influence outcomes far beyond her role. The billionaire finally leaned back in his chair, a faint smile crossing his face. He realized that this encounter had shifted something in him as well. He had come expecting to be frustrated, to encounter incompetence or misunderstanding, but instead he had found skill, poise, and intelligence in an unlikely place. It was a reminder that assumptions could be dangerous, and that sometimes the most remarkable people are those we least expect. The young waitress, having finished explaining her background, returned to her duties, carrying trays with the same careful attention as before. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had handled a difficult moment well. She did not seek recognition, but the acknowledgement she had received from the billionaire lingered in her mind, a reminder of what courage and skill could accomplish. For the billionaire, the day continued differently than he had anticipated. His meetings were smoother, his interactions more mindful, and his awareness of the people around him heightened. He could not stop thinking about the young waitress, about how she had managed to resolve a tense situation with calm intelligence. It was an experience that would stay with him far longer than any transaction or business deal. The lobby, now returning to its normal rhythm, felt alive with a quiet energy. Staff members were more confident, guests more at ease, and the young waitress moved among them with a graceful efficiency that seemed effortless. She had stepped into a moment of tension, used her skills to resolve it, and in doing so, she had changed not only her own experience but also the perception of those around her. And as the day went on, both the billionaire and the young waitress continued with their respective duties, forever marked by the encounter. One had learned humility and respect, the other had demonstrated courage and skill, and both had experienced a rare moment of understanding that bridged worlds, roles, and expectations. It was the kind of moment that stays with people, quietly shaping their paths, teaching lessons that cannot be found in textbooks or training manuals. The lobby had settled into a quiet rhythm, but for the billionaire, calm was no longer the same as before. He remained seated in a leather chair near the large glass windows, watching the young waitress as she moved among the tables with a quiet, steady grace. Every step she took, every motion she made seemed purposeful. There was a confidence in her movements that he could not ignore, and it made him feel both curious and uneasy. He had never been one to pay attention to a server, but now, he found his eyes following her with fascination. The young waitress carried on with her duties, seemingly unaware of his gaze. She arranged plates and glasses with careful precision, wiping down tables with a soft cloth, and responding to other guests' questions politely. There was a calm efficiency in the way she worked, a presence that seemed to command attention without demanding it. And as she moved, she maintained a subtle awareness of the billionaire. She knew he was observing her, but she did not let it affect her composure. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging someone's attention without letting it distract from the work at hand. After a few minutes, he rose from his chair and approached her, walking slowly but deliberately. She noticed him coming but remained calm, placing the tray down carefully and looking up at him with a neutral expression. "I want to understand more about how you do this," he said, his voice steady, without the sharp edge of frustration that had defined him earlier. "It's more than language, isn't it? You handle people, situations, and expectations all at once. That's not easy." The young waitress nodded slightly, recognizing the sincerity in his words. "It's about paying attention," she explained softly, "listening carefully, understanding what is really needed, and then responding in a way that respects everyone involved. Language is just one part. The rest is about understanding people." She paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his. "If you don't notice what's important, you can't help anyone, no matter how much you know." The billionaire listened intently, leaning slightly closer as if trying to catch every nuance of her explanation. He had spent years in boardrooms and negotiations, managing people and situations on a global scale, but he realized that this young waitress was teaching him something he had overlooked: the power of observation, empathy, and calm intelligence. He felt a subtle shift within himself, a rare moment of humility, and a growing respect for her abilities. As they spoke, the lobby continued its flow. Guests chatted softly, unaware of the quiet yet intense conversation unfolding nearby. Staff members moved about, carrying out their tasks efficiently, but occasionally casting quick glances at the two, sensing that something significant was taking place. The young waitress maintained her focus, handling requests from other guests while engaging in conversation with the billionaire. Her composure remained unshaken, her calmness a stark contrast to the chaos he had brought when he first arrived. Curiosity finally overcame the billionaire's remaining skepticism. "How did you learn to handle situations like this?" he asked. "Not just the language, but the way you manage pressure and people. Most would freeze, but you stay steady." The young waitress smiled faintly, a quiet expression that conveyed both humility and pride. "It comes from experience and practice," she said. "I've learned to stay calm, even when others are frustrated or stressed. Observing people, understanding their needs, and thinking carefully before acting. It's something you can develop over time." He nodded slowly, taking in her words. "It's rare," he admitted. "Most people never develop that skill. They either panic or try to dominate a situation. You just handle it effortlessly." There was an unusual softness in his tone, a mixture of admiration and disbelief. He realized that she was not simply translating words or serving coffee. She was managing a complex web of human emotions, expectations, and communication. And she was doing it better than anyone he had ever encountered. The young waitress continued, explaining how she had trained herself to observe and adapt. She spoke about small moments in life that taught her patience, about watching others carefully to understand what they really needed, and about learning to stay composed even when facing frustration or conflict. Her words were simple, yet powerful, revealing a depth of understanding that was rare in someone so young. She spoke without pride or arrogance, simply sharing her approach and insights as if they were natural and obvious. The billionaire, who had seen countless experts, consultants, and advisors in his lifetime, was captivated. He realized that true skill was not always loud or showy. It was often quiet, subtle, and unassuming. Here was someone who had mastered not only language but the art of human interaction. He had come expecting service, efficiency, and routine, but instead, he had found a lesson in skill, patience, and understanding. As the conversation unfolded, he asked about specific moments, curious to understand how she applied her skills in real situations. She spoke about managing difficult guests, resolving misunderstandings, and translating not just words but intentions. She shared anecdotes of situations where her calm approach prevented conflicts, where careful listening helped solve problems, and where small, thoughtful actions created trust and respect. Each story illustrated her point, showing that her abilities were not theoretical but practical and impactful. The billionaire's respect deepened. He realized that intelligence and skill were not just about credentials or titles. They were about awareness, observation, and the ability to act effectively under pressure. He began to see her not just as a waitress, but as a professional in her own right, a problem solver, a communicator, and a person with rare and valuable abilities. For someone like him, accustomed to power and influence, this realization was both humbling and inspiring. While they spoke, the lobby continued its quiet rhythm. Guests moved through the space, staff attended to their duties, and life went on, but there was a subtle energy shift. People began to notice the calm authority of the young waitress. There was a sense that she had achieved something significant, that she had handled a challenging situation with skill and grace. Even those who did not understand the details could sense that something extraordinary had occurred. The billionaire, still seated, asked her one final question. "Do you ever get nervous?" he asked. "When people are frustrated, or situations are tense, don't you feel the pressure?" She shook her head slowly. "Of course I feel it," she replied. "But I've learned that pressure doesn't have to control you. You can control your response. That's the difference. You can't change other people, but you can change how you handle what comes to you. Staying calm allows you to act clearly and effectively." Her words resonated with him deeply. He had spent years learning to control outcomes, to assert influence, and to navigate pressure, but he realized that he had overlooked a simpler, more profound truth: that composure, observation, and empathy often matter more than power or force. He felt a quiet shift within himself, a subtle recognition that he had underestimated not only her abilities but also the lessons she could teach. The young waitress, sensing that the conversation had reached a natural pause, returned to her duties. She moved among the guests, delivering orders with careful attention, checking on their needs, and maintaining the calm energy she had brought to the lobby. She had resolved a problem that seemed insurmountable, taught a lesson in composure and skill, and now quietly continued her work, letting her actions speak louder than words. The billionaire watched her for a few more moments, realizing that he had been profoundly impacted. He had come expecting frustration, inefficiency, and perhaps a minor annoyance. Instead, he had encountered skill, patience, and intelligence in a form he had never anticipated. The experience had shifted his perspective, teaching him the value of humility, observation, and the quiet strength of someone who knew how to act under pressure. As the day progressed, he observed her interactions with other guests and staff. She handled each situation with the same calm precision, adapting to each person's needs without fuss or hesitation. Her presence had transformed the lobby, creating an atmosphere of confidence and reassurance. He realized that she had a unique ability to influence her environment positively, not through authority, but through competence, calmness, and understanding. At one point, a guest approached with a complicated request, speaking quickly and with a hint of frustration. The young waitress paused, listened carefully, and responded with clarity and patience, ensuring that the guest's needs were fully understood and met. The billionaire watched silently, impressed by her ability to navigate complexity without faltering. He noted that her skill went beyond language. It was about reading people, anticipating needs, and managing situations with grace. By the time he prepared to leave the lobby, he felt a sense of respect that was rare for him. He had witnessed a demonstration of talent, composure, and intelligence that challenged his assumptions. He understood that true ability often comes from quiet dedication, careful observation, and the willingness to act thoughtfully, even under pressure. He knew that this young waitress had not only helped him but had also reminded him of lessons that were easily forgotten in a life of wealth and power. As he left, he cast one final glance at her, a subtle acknowledgement of what she had done. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic applause, just a quiet, genuine respect. And for the young waitress, she continued her work, carrying trays, answering questions, and maintaining the calm, confident presence that had transformed the day. She had stepped into a moment of tension and handled it with skill, and the impact of her actions would resonate far longer than anyone in the lobby could realize. The lobby had settled into its usual rhythm, but the energy in the room had shifted. Guests were moving about, some quietly observing the young waitress as she carried trays and answered questions, while staff members were moving with renewed confidence. The atmosphere was calmer, but there was now an undercurrent of respect and admiration for her. Even the billionaire, who had been tense and impatient just hours ago, was beginning to see the lobby through a different lens. He watched her from across the room, noticing small details that he had overlooked before. The way she greeted each guest with a calm smile, how she anticipated their needs without being asked, and how she coordinated smoothly with other staff members, all without ever appearing rushed. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and precise. He realized that she was not just handling her job. She was orchestrating the entire environment around her, ensuring that everything flowed smoothly. Curiosity drew him closer once again. He approached her, careful not to startle her, and spoke in a softer, more measured tone than before. "I need to ask you something," he said. "How do you stay so composed? Even with stress and frustration, you seem steady. Most people would crumble." The young waitress paused for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "I've learned that panic never helps," she said simply. "When someone is frustrated or angry, it's easy to get caught up in their emotions. But staying calm allows you to think clearly and act effectively. That's how problems get solved." The billionaire nodded, clearly impressed. He had spent years in high-pressure meetings, negotiations, and business deals, but her approach was something he had rarely encountered. It was not just about remaining calm. It was about understanding the situation, reading the people involved, and acting with intelligence and care. He realized that this skill was far more valuable than most of the strategies he had learned over the years. He watched as she moved from table to table, responding to guest requests with quiet efficiency. There was no trace of hesitation in her movements, no sign of frustration or annoyance. She was fully present in the moment, focused on the task at hand, and yet aware of the larger environment around her. It was a rare combination of skills, and it struck him that she had likely honed them over many years through experience and careful attention. The billionaire's admiration grew as he observed her interactions with other staff members. She gave subtle guidance when needed, communicated without raising her voice, and handled small misunderstandings gracefully. It was clear that her presence had a calming effect on the entire team. Staff members who had seemed nervous or unsure earlier were now moving confidently, inspired by her example. He realized that leadership was not always about titles or authority. It could also come from skill, intelligence, and quiet confidence. At one point, a guest approached with a complicated request, speaking quickly and in a slightly frustrated tone. The young waitress paused, listened carefully, and then responded in a way that was both clear and reassuring. She managed the request efficiently, ensuring the guest felt understood and satisfied. The billionaire observed, silently impressed. It was one thing to solve a problem in private. It was another to do so openly under pressure, and in a way that earned the respect of everyone around. Feeling compelled to acknowledge her abilities, he approached her again, this time with a small smile. "You've handled everything perfectly," he said. "Not just the language issue, but everything. The way you manage people, the way you handle stress. It's rare to see this." The young waitress nodded politely, maintaining her calm demeanor. She did not seek praise, but she appreciated his words. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I just try to do what's needed and stay focused on what I can control. That usually helps more than getting frustrated." The billionaire leaned back slightly, reflecting on her words. He realized that he had misjudged her earlier, assuming that her role as a waitress limited her abilities. Now, he understood that skill and intelligence were not always visible at first glance. They could be hidden behind humility, quiet presence, or roles that society often underestimated. It was a lesson he would not forget easily. As the day went on, he found himself observing her more closely, noticing the way she managed small conflicts, coordinated with staff, and kept the guests satisfied. Each interaction reinforced his growing respect. He saw that her success was not just about natural talent. It was about consistent effort, observation, and a deep understanding of people. He felt a growing sense of admiration, combined with an awareness that she had qualities he rarely encountered, even among highly educated or experienced professionals. The young waitress continued to move through the lobby with ease, handling each task efficiently while maintaining her calm presence. Guests who had initially been impatient or frustrated were now smiling, their moods transformed by her careful attention and understanding. Even staff members who had doubted themselves earlier were now moving confidently, inspired by her example. It was a rare moment, where one person's competence and composure positively affected everyone around her. At one point, the billionaire spoke again, this time with genuine curiosity. "Have you always been this capable?" he asked. "Or did you learn it along the way?" She paused for a moment, thinking. "I've learned it over time," she said. "From small moments, from observing people, from trying to handle situations calmly and carefully. It's something you develop. It's not about talent alone. It's about paying attention, learning from experience, and choosing how to respond." He listened, clearly captivated. He realized that her approach was applicable far beyond a hotel lobby. It could be applied to business, negotiations, leadership, and life itself. She had shown him that intelligence, calmness, and understanding were more powerful than authority or anger. He felt a quiet shift inside himself, a subtle awareness that he had underestimated the value of these traits in his own life. The lobby continued to hum with activity. Guests moved about, staff members coordinated seamlessly, and the young waitress maintained her calm efficiency. She had become the center of the environment, not because she demanded attention, but because she naturally commanded it through competence and poise. The billionaire observed quietly, reflecting on how her presence had transformed the entire space, and how her abilities had quietly taught him lessons he would not soon forget. Eventually, he approached her once more, a hint of a smile on his face. "I want to ensure that you're recognized for this," he said. "It's rare to find someone who can handle pressure, manage people, and stay calm with such skill. Most would falter, but you excel." The young waitress nodded politely, acknowledging his words without showing any desire for reward or recognition. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I just do what needs to be done. That's all." The billionaire watched her for a moment longer, feeling a mix of admiration and respect. He realized that true skill often came from quiet dedication, careful observation, and the willingness to act thoughtfully under pressure. It was not about titles, authority, or appearances. It was about competence, composure, and understanding. He had witnessed this firsthand, and it had left a lasting impression on him. As the day progressed, he noticed other guests and staff beginning to treat the young waitress differently. There was a subtle recognition of her abilities, a quiet acknowledgement of the skill and composure she demonstrated. People were no longer just seeing her as a server. They were noticing her intelligence, her calm presence, and her ability to influence situations positively. The environment itself seemed transformed, calmer, more efficient, and more harmonious, all because of her influence. The billionaire found himself reflecting on his own experiences. He had spent years managing people, solving problems, and navigating complex situations. But he realized that he had rarely encountered someone who combined skill, composure, and understanding so seamlessly. He felt a deep respect, tempered with the realization that he had misjudged her earlier. His frustration had turned to admiration, and he felt compelled to acknowledge the lessons she had quietly imparted. Eventually, he approached her one final time before leaving the lobby. "I hope you understand," he said, "that what you've done here is remarkable. You've handled a situation that would challenge many experienced professionals, and you've done it with grace and intelligence. It's not something I forget easily." The young waitress smiled faintly, a calm, modest expression that conveyed quiet satisfaction. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I'm just doing my job. But I appreciate your words." As the billionaire turned to leave, he cast one last glance at her, a silent acknowledgement of her abilities. She returned to her duties, moving through the lobby with the same calm efficiency, serving guests, coordinating with staff, and maintaining her quiet authority. The day continued, but the impact of her actions lingered. Guests were more relaxed, staff more confident, and the atmosphere subtly brighter. For both of them, the encounter had left a lasting impression. The young waitress had demonstrated skill, intelligence, and calm under pressure, earning admiration and respect without seeking it. The billionaire had learned a lesson in humility, observation, and the quiet power of competence. It was a rare moment of recognition, one that bridged differences in status, experience, and expectation. And although the day went on as usual, the experience had changed them both, leaving a lasting awareness of what true skill and understanding could accomplish. By the end of the afternoon, the lobby had returned to its usual flow, but the energy remained subtly altered. The young waitress continued her work, calm and focused, while the billionaire departed with a quiet sense of respect and admiration. He knew he had witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration of human capability, composure, and intelligence that would stay with him far longer than any routine business encounter. And for her, the experience was a quiet affirmation of her skills and choices, a reminder that courage, intelligence, and calm action could shape outcomes in ways that were often unseen but deeply impactful. The days following the encounter in the lobby felt different for both the billionaire and the young waitress. For him, the experience had left a lasting impression he could not easily shake. He had encountered many capable people in his life, advisors, assistants, and experts, but rarely had someone so young, so humble, and seemingly ordinary demonstrated such skill, composure, and intelligence. He found himself thinking about her often, recalling the way she had listened carefully, understood the situation, and handled it with quiet confidence. The young waitress, meanwhile, returned to her usual routine at the cafe. She continued to serve drinks, clear tables, and answer guests' questions politely, but there was a new sense of assurance in her movements. She had learned, long ago, that true ability often goes unnoticed until it is needed most. But now, she had seen the immediate impact of stepping forward, of trusting her skills and judgment. The small nods of acknowledgement from staff and the occasional glance from the billionaire reinforced a subtle but powerful lesson. Courage and competence, even from someone in a modest role, could shape events in extraordinary ways. Word of her abilities began to spread quietly among the hotel staff and regular guests. People spoke of how she had managed a difficult situation with patience and intelligence, how she had bridged a language barrier, and how her calm presence had changed the mood of the entire lobby. Staff members who had once felt nervous and unsure now approached her for guidance, subtly looking to her for cues on how to handle guests with the same grace and efficiency. It was clear that her influence extended beyond her assigned tasks. She had become a quiet leader, inspiring others through example rather than authority. The billionaire, who had initially arrived in a rush and frustration, found himself drawn back to the hotel on several occasions. Each time he visited, he observed her in action, increasingly impressed by her consistent skill and poise. He realized that what she had demonstrated once was not a lucky moment. It was a reflection of her abilities and character. Her calm efficiency, careful attention to detail, and empathetic approach to people were qualities that could not be taught overnight. They were cultivated over time, through patience, observation, and deliberate effort. Eventually, he decided to take a bold step. He approached the hotel management privately and spoke about the young waitress. He described in detail how she had handled a challenging situation, emphasizing not only her language skills but her remarkable composure and intelligence. He requested that her abilities be recognized in some meaningful way, insisting that she be considered for opportunities that matched her skills. The management, surprised but impressed by his recommendation, agreed to discuss her advancement, realizing that she had earned more than just praise. She had earned opportunity. The young waitress, unaware of the full extent of the billionaire's influence, continued her work with the same calm dedication. One morning, a manager approached her with a letter, explaining that it contained a recommendation from a guest who had witnessed her extraordinary skill. She opened it and read the words carefully, her eyes widening slightly as she realized the magnitude of what was being offered. The billionaire had personally recommended her for a position that would allow her to use her skills on a larger scale, in a role that involved communication, coordination, and problem-solving. It was a moment of disbelief and excitement. She had never imagined that a single encounter, handled with calmness and skill, could lead to such a significant change in her life. Her mind raced with possibilities, thinking about the new experiences, challenges, and growth that lay ahead. Yet she remained grounded, understanding that the same principles, observation, patience, and careful action, would continue to guide her in this new chapter. When she finally met the billionaire again, this time in a more formal setting, there was a sense of mutual respect that transcended their previous roles. He greeted her with a genuine smile, no longer just the impatient guest, but someone who recognized and valued her abilities. "You've proven yourself more than capable," he said. "I have no doubt that you will excel in this new role. Your skill, calm, and understanding are rare and valuable." She nodded politely, her usual calm demeanor intact, but inside, she felt a quiet excitement. In her new role, she began to see how her abilities could make an even greater impact. She coordinated events, assisted in international communications, and helped bridge gaps between people from different cultures and languages. Her calm, thoughtful approach earned her respect from colleagues and clients alike. What had begun as a single moment of courage in the hotel lobby had grown into a broader platform for her skills, allowing her to influence situations far beyond what she had imagined. The billionaire, for his part, continued to follow her progress. He occasionally checked in, offering guidance or encouragement, but mostly he observed from a distance, appreciating how she applied the lessons she had demonstrated to him. He reflected on how a brief moment of interaction had reshaped his understanding of talent, leadership, and human capability. He realized that recognition of skill was not limited to titles or status. It could be found anywhere, sometimes in the most unexpected places. As months passed, her influence continued to grow. Staff members who had once looked up to her quietly now actively sought her advice. Guests praised her ability to handle complex requests with grace, and even other professionals acknowledged her intelligence and composure. She had become a role model not because she sought attention, but because her consistent actions spoke louder than words. She had demonstrated that courage, skill, and patience could create opportunities that were previously unimaginable. Looking back on that first encounter, she understood the true significance of her actions. The moment she chose to step forward, speak clearly, and manage the situation with calm skill, she had changed not only the outcome of that interaction but also the course of her life. It was a reminder that small decisions, made with confidence and care, could have extraordinary consequences. And she knew that she had earned every opportunity not through luck, but through her ability to observe, adapt, and act thoughtfully under pressure. The billionaire, who had once been impatient and frustrated, had also been transformed by the encounter. He had learned a lesson in humility and respect, realizing that true talent often goes unnoticed until it is needed most. He understood that leadership was not just about authority or influence, but also about recognizing skill, supporting growth, and valuing intelligence wherever it appears. The young waitress had reminded him, in the simplest and most profound way, that the capacity to act wisely, calmly, and effectively could come from anyone, regardless of status or title. The story of that encounter began to spread beyond the hotel. Colleagues, guests, and even people in the city's business community heard about the young waitress who had managed a high-pressure situation with calm skill, bridging language barriers and earning the respect of one of the most powerful men in the world. Her actions became an example of courage, intelligence, and composure, inspiring others to recognize the potential in themselves and those around them. Through all of this, she remained humble. She did not boast about her achievements, nor did she let recognition change her approach. She continued to act with calm, thoughtful precision, guided by the same principles that had served her from the beginning: observation, patience, and careful action. Her focus remained on helping others, solving problems, and maintaining her composure, understanding that true influence comes not from ego, but from consistent, meaningful action. Over time, the relationship between the billionaire and the young waitress evolved into one of mutual respect and mentorship. He offered her guidance on navigating complex professional situations, while she continued to demonstrate skill and composure that inspired him and those around her. Their connection was built on admiration, trust, and recognition of each other's abilities, transcending social status, roles, and expectations. The young waitress's life had changed in ways she could not have imagined. A single moment, handled with calm intelligence and courage, had opened doors to opportunities, respect, and personal growth. She had proven that true skill was not defined by role, title, or circumstance, but by the ability to act thoughtfully, observe carefully, and manage challenges with composure. And the lessons she had learned about courage, humility, and the value of quiet competence would continue to guide her in every future endeavor. The billionaire, reflecting on the journey, recognized the lasting impact of her actions. He had come expecting frustration and inefficiency, but he had encountered a person whose skill, patience, and intelligence had reshaped his understanding of talent and leadership. He realized that recognition, opportunity, and respect should be extended to those who demonstrate true ability, regardless of status or position. The experience left him more thoughtful, more observant, and more aware of the potential in everyone around him. In the end, the young waitress and the billionaire had both been changed by a single encounter. She had stepped forward with courage and skill, bridging a gap that had seemed insurmountable. And in doing so, she had opened doors to opportunity, respect, and growth. He had witnessed humility, intelligence, and composure in action, learning lessons that would shape his approach to leadership, communication, and recognition. Their paths had crossed in a moment of tension, but the consequences of that meeting would last far beyond the hotel lobby, demonstrating the profound impact of courage, skill, and thoughtful action. As she continued her work, she carried the confidence of someone who had faced a challenge and succeeded. She knew that life would present new obstacles, but she also knew that she had the ability to navigate them with intelligence, calm, and patience. And for the billionaire, the memory of her composure, skill, and insight would remain a guiding lesson. That the capacity for excellence can be found in unexpected places, and that recognition, respect, and opportunity should follow merit, wherever it appears. And so, life went on, but the impact of that single moment, the choice to act with calm skill in the face of tension, remained. For the young waitress, it was a beginning, a chance to grow, learn, and shape her future. For the billionaire, it was a reminder of humility, awareness, and the importance of valuing the talent that exists all around us. Together, their story became a quiet testament to the power of courage, intelligence, and thoughtful action, a story that would inspire anyone who heard it.